Hi, my name is Derek Jimenez. Do you enjoy life? What experiences are fun and worth discussing about? Well, one thing we can all agree on is that lasers are pretty cool. But if you want to be cool, you need to ask yourself, what are lasers? Who uses them? And what is light? The first two important figures in the history of light are Christian Huygens and Isaac Newton. In 1690,
Huygens published his theory that light transmits as waves similar to sound waves, spreading from a light source which our eyes detect by vibrations reaching our retinas. Then in 1704, Newton published his theory saying that light is a stream of particles that he calls corpuscles, which are also detected by our retinas.
For the next century, Newton was widely accepted as being correct, even though some of his explanations were inadequate, until the electromagnetic spectrum was discovered. In 1804, Thomas Young
Found that when two light beams overlap, they make bright and dark stripes just like overlapping water waves, so light had to be waves, not particles. Then in 1821, Michael Faraday, with the work of Hans Christian Ørsted, found that when you put a wire with electricity next to a magnet, it rotates around it. He called it electromagnetic rotations. James Clerk Maxwell saw Faraday's relationship between electricity and magnetism and decided to make it into an equation.
From his model, he found both electric and magnetic waves at almost the speed of light, both making up electromagnetic waves. Light has to be on the electromagnetic spectrum, and light has to be a wave.
Albert Einstein and Max Planck said no.
Planck's theory in 1900 states that electromagnetic radiation is emitted or absorbed in packets, quanta.
Einstein then proposed that if light is emitted and absorbed in these quanta, light itself is formed into quanta, the smallest discrete quantity, earlier known as corpuscles, also described as packets, also known as photons, of course not to be confused with phonons.
This is a light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. What does that mean? Well, first we need to know a bit more about photons. Photons come from electrons. When an electron from an atom gains energy,
It gets raised to a higher energy level, and once it returns to its original state, it releases a photon.
when the electron returns to its original energy by itself, this is called spontaneous emission. So in the laser acronym, what is stimulated emission? Stimulated emission is when the electron returning to its original energy is caused by being stimulated by a photon.
Yes, atoms both absorb and radiate photons, so when the electron gets hit by a photon, two photons are released with the same direction and wavelength as the first, and the second photon comes from the extra energy of the absorbed photon.
In essence, a laser is a beam of coherent photons, a beam of photons that all have the same direction and frequency as each other.
Lasers have three main components: a medium for the photons to pass through, an energy source, and what's called an optical resonator that builds up the number of photons.
A basic laser can be made by making coherent photons through stimulated emission, which can be done by making two mirrors face each other.
This laser has a rod of ruby crystals, and when energy is added to it from what's called the flash tube, photons are created, which create more and more photons as they hit more atoms in the rod until the beam is strong enough to pass through one side, which is made to be slightly less reflective than the other side.
The first laser was based off the maser, which was made in 1954 by J.P. Gordon, H.J. Zeeger, and Charles Towns, which uses microwaves instead of light.
Charles Towns and another man, Arthur L. Shallow, came up with the idea for the laser, and in 1960, Theodore Maiman was the first to create it, using helium and neon gas as a laser medium. That same year, John C. Palany said, "Hey, let's use molecules of gas for the laser medium." Kumar Patel said, and then made the carbon dioxide laser in 1964.
The most powerful continuous wave laser. Patel then added nitrogen and it increased the power to 1,000 times more watts. The molecule method is a lot more efficient because instead of getting the photons from the electrons lowering in energy levels,
They come from the energy of every vibrating particle, so not just the electrons, but also the protons and neutrons.
a significantly important laser contributor is Alan Carswell. He left the University of Toronto with an engineering physics degree and went on to pioneer LiDAR, light detection and ranging, which now makes maps and is important in geography and geomatics.
Alan Carswell's accomplishments also led him to be invited by NASA to lead the first LiDAR operation on Mars in 2007 to study its atmosphere.
Once the beam exits the laser, its behavior follows the behavior of light. Most people already know reflection and refraction, but what happens during each phenomenon?
Isaac Newton demonstrated that in reflection, photons follow the laws of motion and the conservation of momentum. The same way a billiard ball bounces off a real cushion, light experiences an elastic collision when reflecting. This is a specular reflection.
For most other objects that light hits that aren't smooth, the light scatters in all directions away from it.
This is called a diffuse reflection. In refraction, light changes direction because its speed changes across both mediums.
This is illustrated by Huygens' principle, stating that every point of a wavefront is also the source point where secondary waves spread out from, and the resulting tangent line of all the secondary waves make up the new wavefront.
This behavior is also proven by Snell's law, which allows one to calculate the angle of refraction with the incident angle and the indices of refraction, which is a ratio of light speed to the speed of the medium.
During refraction, some energy also reflects, and a higher angle of incidence causes more light to reflect. This is called partial reflection, partial refraction. Diffraction is also caused by light's wave properties. Waves bend and spread around objects that they hit.
And those waves will interfere with each other to either combine in constructive interference or be cancelled out in destructive interference.
This is the basis of Thomas Young's double slit experiment in 1801, where light is passed through two slits.
And its waves create bright and dark spots, each made from constructive and destructive interference. This same experiment can be done with a laser, which will show a horizontal line of dots because of diffraction.
Scattering is when light bounces off an object depending on the light's wavelength and the object's size and shape.
Lower wavelengths scatter more light, meaning that blue and violet light scatters the most. The sky's color is because of this effect.
Scattering is also why red lasers are the most common, as the red wavelength makes it scatter the least. So that's how a laser works, but so what? Who cares? Let me show you. Laser altimeters are devices on satellites, planes, and helicopters that are used to record the topography of a planet.
How they work is they emit a laser onto the terrain at the same time that a timer starts, and when the laser scatters, some of it reflects back to the altimeter, which detects it and stops the timer.
So if the timer is shorter, the terrain is more elevated, and if the timer is longer, the terrain is less elevated. Laser cutting and laser welding both utilize the strength and concentration of a laser
To either make fast and precise cuts or to connect any material with a high heat conductivity. Laser cutting is used for almost any kind of material like wood, plastic, acrylic, steel, and aluminum, and laser welding is used most often in the automotive industry for its low cost.
Lasers are also used in the medical field. LASIK eye surgery, or laser eye surgery, is the correction of eyes with
Nearsightedness, farsightedness, and astigmatism. Eyes work by focusing visible light on the retina by refracting it with the cornea, and in each of these conditions, visible light is unfocused.
Surgery is first done by using a femtosecond laser, which is a 10,053 nanometer infrared laser.
The femtosecond laser makes a thin flap in the cornea. Then an excimer laser, a 193 nanometer ultraviolet laser, is used to remove tissue under the flap, and when the flap is returned in place, the cornea is now reshaped to refract properly by making it either flatter, steeper, or smoother.
But that's not nearly all. Laser diodes, also known as semiconductor lasers, are smaller and more efficient lasers useful
In a few things like barcode scanners, laser printers, reading and recording CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, a large variety of remote controls with wide beam divergence so you don't have to point it directly.
and of course, the laser pointer. If you'd like to work with lasers in the field of optics, this is the education and training required. Laser engineering is a type of electrical engineering that focuses on the maintenance, testing, and design of lasers and equipment that uses lasers.
Laser engineering is a broad career that applies to lasers used in many different industries: medicine, communications, aerospace, cosmetics, and even the military.
Laser engineers need a bachelor's degree, usually in physics or electrical engineering, and they have 3 to 6 months of training. I like to shoot beams into my victims' eyeballs, and if you do too, you require an optometry degree accredited by the Accreditation Council on Optometric Education after an undergraduate degree.
As well as 5 years of eye surgery training, passing an exam, and finally being licensed.
And fiber optic design engineering involves the designing of fiber optic cable systems, which are like normal cables, but
Made of glass or plastic inside that guides lasers instead of electricity to us much faster. This career requires a bachelor's degree in either civil or optical engineering, as well as 3 to 5 or more years of training inside and outside plant operations.
which basically means equipment installed to the outside and inside of buildings. So if you love lasers and want to be around them, do these!
Lasers are incredible to witness, not just for their impressive technology, but also in the way that they demonstrate light. If you love lasers, you are now my friend, and we will both continue to see what lasers can do in the future. Thank you.